Nicole had never thought that peace could feel so fragile. When she first moved into the small suburban neighborhood just outside Portland, she imagined quiet mornings with coffee on her porch, the sound of birds instead of arguments, the kind of calm that only comes after a storm. Her divorce had taken everything out of her: money, time, and most of all, her sense of safety. The house she bought was modest, but it represented something she hadn't felt in years: control. Every inch of it, from the white-painted fence to the narrow driveway lined with hydrangeas, belonged to her alone. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and that meant something. For a while, things were exactly as she hoped. She kept to herself, waved politely at passing cars, and spent her weekends fixing the garden and repainting the old porch steps. But peace has a way of drawing out those who can't stand to see others enjoying it. And in Nicole's case, that someone lived right next door. Karen McAllister had been there long before Nicole arrived. She was one of those neighbors who seemed to know everything about everyone: their schedules, their guests, even the color of the curtains they chose. Her lawn was perfectly trimmed, her mailbox polished to a mirror shine, and her eyes always watching. At first, Karen's smiles felt polite, if slightly forced. She introduced herself with that artificial sweetness of someone who wanted to appear welcoming, but already measured you against her invisible checklist of neighborhood perfection. "We like things neat around here," she'd said on their first meeting, glancing at Nicole's half-unpacked moving boxes stacked by the door. "You'll get used to it." Nicole had laughed politely, brushing it off as typical suburban stiffness. But in the weeks that followed, she began to understand that Karen wasn't merely uptight, she was territorial. Every small detail became a reason for her to comment or correct. If Nicole's trash can was a foot too close to the curb, Karen would send a friendly reminder text, quoting some obscure neighborhood guideline. If Nicole parked her car slightly along the shared fence line, Karen would knock on her door, voice dripping with condescension, claiming that visibility for backing out was a concern. Nicole tried to stay civil. After all, she was starting over. She didn't want conflict. She apologized when she didn't need to, adjusted her car by a few inches, smiled through gritted teeth. But beneath that politeness, irritation brewed. There was something invasive about the way Karen always managed to appear the moment Nicole stepped outside. She would linger just long enough to make a comment disguised as advice. "You might want to reconsider planting those," she'd say, pointing to the tulips by the fence. "They attract too many bees, and some of us are allergic." Her tone was always calm, but the message was clear. This wasn't just a neighborhood. It was her kingdom, and Nicole had moved into it uninvited. It wasn't until the second month that Nicole noticed something truly unsettling. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses and the sky turned a soft orange, she stepped outside to bring in her mail and found Karen standing near her driveway, phone in hand, snapping pictures of her car. When Nicole approached, Karen didn't even look embarrassed. "Just documenting," she said coolly. "Your car's awfully close to my property line. If anything happens, I'll have proof." Nicole stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding in disbelief. Proof of what? Her car wasn't touching anything. It was parked entirely within her space. But before she could respond, Karen was already walking away, muttering something about negligence and respecting boundaries. That night, Nicole sat on her couch staring at the wall, the faint scent of paint and new furniture surrounding her. And, for the first time, she felt uneasy in her own home. It wasn't the act itself. It was the intent behind it. Karen wanted control. She needed to establish dominance in ways that were small enough to seem harmless, but constant enough to wear a person down. Nicole tried to tell herself she was imagining it, that she was just sensitive after everything she'd been through. Yet each day the tension grew. Karen would stand at her window whenever Nicole came or went, pretending to water her plants while keeping her eyes fixed on Nicole's car. She began to make subtle digs in conversation, commenting on how some people don't really understand neighborhood etiquette. The final straw came one weekend morning, when Nicole stepped outside to find her fence post leaning, a fresh dent in the wood where it hadn't been before. She looked toward Karen's driveway and noticed the faint smear of white paint along the corner of her neighbor's SUV, paint that matched Nicole's fence exactly. Karen was outside, pretending not to notice, pruning her roses with mechanical precision. When Nicole called out asking if she'd hit the fence, Karen looked up with mock confusion. "Oh, please," she said, smirking. "Maybe you should learn how to park properly. You're always too close. You can't expect people to drive around your mess forever." Her voice was sharp, her eyes glinting with that same satisfaction Nicole had seen the first day they met. Nicole stood frozen, gripping the edge of the broken fence, anger rising in her chest. She wanted to shout, to demand an apology, but Karen had already turned her back. In that moment, Nicole realized something fundamental. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't over. It was the beginning of a quiet war, one fought not with weapons, but with manipulation, lies, and the relentless erosion of peace. And Karen, for reasons known only to her, had chosen Nicole as her target. It happened just after dawn on a chilly Saturday, the kind of morning when the air still smelled of dew and wood smoke, and the street was quiet except for the distant hum of a passing car. Nicole was sitting at her kitchen table scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone when a deafening crash shattered the calm. The sound was so violent that the mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. For a second she didn't move, unsure if what she heard was real, until the second thud came. The hollow groan of splintering wood, followed by a long scrape of metal. Her heart raced as she ran to the window and froze. Her fence, the one she had painted herself just 2 weeks earlier, was half collapsed, crushed beneath the front end of a large gray SUV. And behind the steering wheel, gripping it with trembling hands and a glassy stare, sat Karen. Nicole burst through her front door and sprinted toward the wreckage, her breath fogging in the cold morning air. The SUV was still running, its tires spinning uselessly against the dirt, engine coughing like a wounded animal. Karen didn't look hurt, just dazed, or maybe annoyed. She opened the door, staggered out, and immediately began shouting before Nicole could even ask if she was all right. "You parked too close to my driveway again," she screamed, slurring slightly, her voice cracking with indignation. "I told you this would happen one day." Nicole stopped a few feet away, stunned by both the accusation and the smell that hit her as Karen waved her arms. An unmistakable mix of alcohol and cheap perfume. "Karen, what the hell are you talking about? My car's not even near your driveway," Nicole said, pointing to her sedan parked neatly in front of her house, a good 2 meters from the invisible boundary line Karen always obsessed over. But Karen wasn't listening. She kicked at a piece of broken wood and snapped, "You shouldn't have built your stupid fence so close to the street. It's dangerous. I could have been killed." Nicole stared at her in disbelief, unable to process the absurdity. "You drove into my fence, Karen. You destroyed my property. You need to turn off your engine and call your insurance company." That word, insurance, seemed to flick a switch. Karen's face changed, tightening with sudden panic before twisting back into anger. "Don't threaten me, young lady. I've lived here for 20 years. You're lucky I'm not pressing charges for obstruction," she shouted, staggering slightly as she pointed an accusing finger at Nicole. A few neighbors had begun to emerge from their homes, drawn by the noise. Mrs. Delaney from across the street wrapped her robe tighter and whispered something to her husband, both of them watching silently from their porch. It was humiliating. Nicole could feel their eyes on her, could feel how easily Karen's performance might sway anyone who didn't see the full picture. The police arrived 20 minutes later, after Nicole made the call herself. By then, Karen had moved her SUV back a few feet, as if to hide the extent of the damage, and was rehearsing her victim routine with increasing volume. "I told her a dozen times to stop parking there. I couldn't see past that fence of hers. It's an eyesore anyway. Look what it did to my car," she said to the responding officer, a young man who looked both tired and slightly amused. He turned to Nicole, who stood beside the shattered remains of her fence holding her phone. "Ma'am, can you explain what happened?" She showed him the security footage from her front camera. The video was clear. Karen's SUV speeding toward the fence in a straight line. No braking until impact, no sign of an obstacle that could justify it. The officer frowned and asked Karen to step aside. "Were you drinking, ma'am?" he asked carefully. What? No, of course not, Karen barked, but her words were thick, her movements jerky. When the officer asked for her license and insurance, Karen hesitated, fumbling through her purse. The silence dragged until she finally muttered something about forgetting it at home. The officer's patience thinned. He called in a unit to conduct a sobriety test, and that's when Karen's mask began to slip. She turned on Nicole again, eyes flashing. You think you're so clever, don't you? Filming me like some criminal? You're the reason people like me can't feel safe anymore, she spat. Nicole didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The damage spoke for itself. When the breathalyzer confirmed Karen was over the limit, the second officer exchanged a knowing look with the first. They escorted Karen to sit on the curb while paperwork was processed, her protests growing weaker with each passing minute. But even then, as her SUV sat idling and the neighbors whispered, Karen's arrogance didn't fully break. She insisted it was all a misunderstanding, that she had simply tapped the fence, that the test was wrong because of her mouthwash. When they finally towed her car and issued a citation, she turned to Nicole with a glare that made her skin crawl. You'll regret this, she said under her breath, loud enough for Nicole to hear, but quiet enough that the officers wouldn't notice. Then she was gone, escorted away in the back of the patrol car. That night, Nicole couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flash of headlights, heard the crack of wood snapping. The house, once her safe haven, now felt exposed. She replayed the footage from her Dashcam, confirming what she already knew. Karen hadn't lost control of her vehicle. She had accelerated on purpose. The footage showed her SUV idling for several seconds before lunging forward, headlights flaring. There was no mistaking intent. Nicole sent a copy to the police as evidence, but she knew that even if the law handled it, the emotional damage was already done. The following morning, she woke to find a single sheet of paper taped to her mailbox. The note was written in neat cursive, the kind of handwriting that seemed almost too deliberate. Next time, move your car. Accidents happen. Nicole stood there, the cold morning air biting at her face, reading the words again and again. It wasn't even signed, but she didn't need it to be. The ink smelled faintly of the same floral perfume Karen always wore. Her hands trembled as she tore the note to pieces, but it did nothing to ease the feeling growing inside her. A deep, sickening certainty that this was far from over. She was dealing with someone who didn't fear consequences, someone whose self-righteousness shielded her from shame. Karen had crossed a line that morning, and Nicole understood now that she wasn't just fighting for a fence or a car. She was fighting for the right to live peacefully in her own home, and she had no idea how far her neighbor was willing to go to take that from her. The police report should have been the end of it. Karen had been cited for reckless driving and DUI, her license temporarily suspended pending the hearing, and Nicole had handed over all the evidence she had, the dashcam footage, the security camera angle from the porch, and even the pictures of the damage. But if she thought logic and proof would stop Karen, she underestimated just how far a desperate, prideful woman could go to protect her own ego. The morning after the crash, Nicole stepped outside to take photos for her insurance claim and found that someone had rearranged the fallen fence pieces overnight. They weren't scattered by the impact anymore. They'd been deliberately stacked in a neat pile against her garage, almost mockingly, as though someone was tidying up the mess they had caused. On top of the pile sat a coffee mug, half full, with a lipstick mark on the rim. It wasn't hers. The act was small but chilling. It wasn't vandalism. It was a message. Karen was still out there, still watching. And she wanted Nicole to know that no matter what the police or insurance company said, she wasn't finished. The insurance adjuster arrived that afternoon, a middle-aged man named David, who carried himself with the weary patience of someone who had seen every type of suburban disaster imaginable. He examined the crushed wood, measured the tire marks, and took photos without much comment, until Nicole showed him the video. His expression changed, tightening with disbelief. She actually accelerated, he asked quietly. Nicole nodded. And she was drunk? The police confirmed it. He sighed and shook his head. In most cases like this, the driver's insurance covers it. But if she's uninsured, and given her state, that's likely, it's going to be a process. You might have to sue directly to recover damages. Nicole thanked him, though the words felt hollow. The cost of the repairs was nothing compared to the cost of knowing Karen would still be across the fence, or what was left of it. She tried to go about her day, but every sound made her flinch. When dusk fell, she noticed Karen's house was dark except for a single light in the living room. Her SUV was gone, towed away by police, yet Nicole could swear she saw movement behind the curtains. She convinced herself she was imagining it, that she was just anxious. But when she checked her porch the next morning, a fresh set of muddy footprints trailed across the steps. She followed them to the edge of her property where they stopped, right by the fence post Karen had broken. Over the next week, strange things began to happen with unnerving consistency. Her trash cans were overturned twice, the mail delivered soaking wet as if someone had poured water on it, and one morning her garden hose was found running, flooding the patch of soil where her hydrangeas had once bloomed. Nicole filed a complaint with the police, but without proof, it was written off as coincidence. The officer who took her statement was polite, but clearly skeptical. "You said she's your neighbor, right? Sometimes these things get exaggerated in disputes. Try installing a camera, maybe." She didn't bother explaining that she already had one. She just bought 2 more. She installed them herself that evening, one facing the driveway and another by the side gate where the fence had been breached. A few days later, the first real evidence arrived. Nicole was reviewing footage on her laptop when she saw movement around 11:40 p.m. The grainy video showed a figure creeping along the property line, flashlight flickering, the silhouette unmistakably familiar. The short haircut, the stiff posture, the floral-patterned robe she wore even outside. Karen. She wasn't doing anything overtly violent. She was just standing there, staring at Nicole's car, her head tilted slightly to one side like she was studying a problem that needed solving. The camera's microphone caught something faint. The whisper of her voice carried by the wind. Too close. Always too close. Then she turned and disappeared back into the dark. Nicole saved the clip immediately and forwarded it to the police, but again, they offered little more than a written acknowledgement. "No crime was committed in the footage," the email reply read. "Surveillance alone does not constitute harassment." The next morning, Karen was waiting at the end of the driveway as Nicole left for work, standing with her arms crossed and that smug half-smile on her face. "Morning," she said sweetly as though nothing had happened. "I saw some men here earlier. Fixing your fence, I assume." Nicole didn't respond, stepping around her toward her car. Karen leaned closer, her tone dropping to a hiss. "You might want to be careful with those cameras, dear. Not everyone appreciates being spied on." Nicole froze, the keys clenched in her fist. "You were on my property last night," she said quietly. "I have you on video." Karen's smile didn't falter. "Then you should show it to your friends at the police. They'll love that. Maybe they'll even believe you this time." That night, Nicole's lawyer, a calm, methodical woman named Erin, called her after reviewing the situation. "We can file for a restraining order if the behavior continues," she said, her voice steady but firm. "In the meantime, document everything. Dates, times, recordings, any communication. This woman is digging her own grave legally. You just need to stay patient." Nicole tried to take the advice to heart, but patience was wearing thin. The emotional toll was growing unbearable. Every night she lay awake listening for footsteps outside. Every creak in the walls made her heart race. She started keeping her phone beside her in bed, screen brightness dimmed, the camera feed open so she could watch her driveway live. Then came the confrontation that would shatter any illusion of safety left. Nicole returned home late from work one evening to find a large envelope taped to her front door. Inside was a printed letter, an official-looking notice claiming that she was in violation of community parking guidelines and that her vehicle would be reported for obstructing neighborly access. It was signed Neighborhood Compliance Committee, but the formatting, the wording, and even the paper stock were identical to the notices Karen used to print for her garden club. Nicole stormed next door, knocking hard enough to make the windows rattle. When Karen opened the door, she looked genuinely delighted. "Oh, did you get my notice?" she said innocently. "It's about your car again. I'm afraid we'll have to involve the homeowners association if this keeps up." Nicole's voice trembled with contained fury. "You don't have the right to issue anything." You're harassing me, and I have the evidence. Karen laughed softly, the sound sharp as broken glass. Evidence? You think anyone's going to side with you after you dragged my name through the mud? You called the police on me over a fence. People here know who the real problem is. Nicole wanted to scream, but she realized, standing there on Karen's perfectly swept porch, that her neighbor truly believed her own lies. There was no remorse, no guilt, only the need to win, to control, to destroy. That night, Nicole uploaded every video and document she had to a secure cloud drive, knowing she might need them soon. When she woke the next morning, she found her tires slashed and a smear of dried mud across her windshield in the shape of a handprint. The cameras hadn't caught it. The power had gone out for 2 hours overnight. Whether it was coincidence or something more deliberate, Nicole didn't care anymore. The line had been crossed long ago, and she finally understood. Karen wasn't just unstable. She was dangerous. The morning of the hearing arrived wrapped in a kind of tension that felt alive, breathing through every corner of Nicole's house. She had barely slept. The night before, she had sat at her kitchen table surrounded by folders, videos, and printed screenshots, each piece of evidence arranged like a shield she hoped would hold. Her lawyer, Aaron, had been clear. This isn't just about offense or harassment. It's about credibility. She'll twist the story until you look like the aggressor. We'll counter it with facts and consistency. That's what wins cases like this. Nicole had nodded, but no amount of preparation could ease the heaviness pressing against her chest. Every step Karen took, every calculated smirk, had pushed her to the edge of exhaustion. Still, she wasn't going to lose her home, her peace, or her sanity to a woman who thrived on chaos. The mediation was held in a bland, windowless room downtown, a sterile, neutral space meant to feel safe, but instead suffocating in its silence. Karen arrived 5 minutes late, wearing a soft pink blazer and pearls, the picture of suburban innocence. She greeted the mediator with a rehearsed smile, ignoring Nicole entirely. Her attorney, a smooth-talking man with a voice like syrup, immediately began framing her as the victim. My client has endured months of intimidation, property damage, and emotional distress at the hands of Ms. Lawson, he said, spreading his hands dramatically as if unveiling a tragedy. Nicole could hardly believe it. The words washed over her like acid, each one twisting reality until it resembled some distorted mirror version of the truth. Karen sat beside him, nodding solemnly, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When it was her turn to speak, Nicole kept her voice steady. Aaron had coached her well, calm, factual, unwavering. She outlined the events from the crash onward, presenting footage one clip at a time. The dashcam showing Karen's deliberate acceleration into the fence, the porch camera capturing her trespassing at night, the audio of her muttered threats. The mediator leaned forward slightly as each new piece of evidence played, his expression shifting from polite neutrality to growing unease. "These are clear," he said finally, turning toward Karen's attorney. "Do you dispute their authenticity?" The man hesitated, glancing at Karen. "We don't deny the footage, but we assert that it's taken out of context. My client was under extreme emotional distress due to harassment and provocation." Aaron's lips curved in a cold half-smile. "So, emotional distress made her drive drunk into a fence and sneak around at midnight with a flashlight?" she asked smoothly. "That's quite the defense." Karen's composure faltered then, a flicker of the venom beneath the pastel politeness. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "That woman has made my life miserable. She parks in front of my house, she spies on me, she spreads lies about me to the neighbors. I just want to live in peace." The irony of that statement was almost too much for Nicole to bear. Before she could respond, the mediator raised a hand for silence. "Enough," he said firmly. "This has clearly escalated far beyond a parking dispute. Given the documentation, Ms. McAllister, it's my recommendation that you cease all contact with Ms. Lawson and cover the damages to her property." Karen's attorney began to protest, but the mediator cut him off. "I'm not making a legal ruling. I'm giving a professional recommendation. If this continues, it will move to civil court. and the evidence will speak for itself. The session ended without resolution, but with something close to vindication. As they left, Karen brushed past Nicole, her perfume sharp and cloying. "You think you've won?" she whispered. "You've embarrassed me. People talk, but they'll turn on you soon enough. No one likes a victim who won't let things go." Her words lingered like a poison. Nicole didn't respond, didn't look back. She and Aaron walked in silence to the parking lot, where the lawyer finally turned to her. "She's unraveling," Aaron said quietly. "People like her always do when they lose control. Just keep documenting. This will be over soon." Nicole wanted to believe her. She needed to. But the days that followed proved that Karen wasn't ready to lose anything. A week later, Nicole came home from work to find a bright orange notice taped to her door, a citation from the Homeowners Association. It accused her of unauthorized reconstruction of a fence and failure to comply with visual design standards. The language was almost comically formal, but the message underneath was unmistakable. Karen had found another angle. Nicole's stomach twisted as she read it. She called Aaron immediately. "This is harassment," she said, voice trembling with disbelief. "She's using the HOA now." Aaron sighed. "Of course she is. It's what bullies do when the law doesn't bend for them. Send me the notice. I'll handle it." Still, it didn't stop the feeling of being cornered. Neighbors who used to smile politely began avoiding eye contact. A few even crossed the street when she walked by. Rumors were spreading. False stories that she was suing everyone, that she was unstable and vindictive. Nicole knew exactly where they came from. Karen was poisoning the neighborhood, turning civility into suspicion. One evening, as Nicole sat by her window watching the light fade, she saw Karen in her yard talking animatedly to a couple from 2 houses down. Her gestures were wide and theatrical, her expression full of wounded innocence. The couple nodded sympathetically. Nicole closed the curtains and felt something inside her snap. There was no reasoning with someone like that. Logic meant nothing to a person who believed their lies were truth. So she fought back, not with anger, but with precision. She installed new cameras, hidden this time, and upgraded the storage to cloud backup with encrypted access. She kept every letter, every notice, every email, building a fortress of evidence. When Karen filed yet another complaint, this one claiming Nicole had verbally assaulted her, Nicole's lawyer responded within hours, attaching timestamps, recordings, and transcripts that proved otherwise. The HOA's tone shifted after that. The next notice came not as an accusation, but as an apology. It was a small victory, but in a war like this, small victories mattered. And yet, victory didn't feel like peace. One night, as Nicole was reviewing footage, she noticed a car slowing in front of her house around 2 a.m. The headlights lingered, illuminating her driveway. The silhouette of the driver was unmistakable. Karen, despite her suspended license, sitting behind the wheel of a rental car. Nicole's heart began to race. She watched as the car idled for several minutes before rolling away. The next morning, she found her mailbox dented and the camera above it smashed. She stood in the cold sunlight, staring at the broken plastic on the ground, the quiet suburban street around her so peaceful it felt obscene. That was the moment she understood there would be no returning to normal until Karen was forced to stop completely. The justice system was slow, the police indifferent, but she had the truth, and she had proof. That evening, Nicole called Aaron again, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. "I want to take her to court," she said. "No more mediation, no more warnings." Aaron didn't hesitate. "Then we'll do it. We'll make it official. You've got everything we need." The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, and formal filings. Nicole moved like a woman possessed, no longer reacting to Karen's provocations, but documenting them with surgical precision. Every note, every whisper, every late-night car that lingered too long, all of it became evidence. By the end of that week, the subpoena was delivered. Karen's reaction was immediate. Nicole watched from her window as the process server handed her the envelope. Karen's face turned pale, then flushed crimson. She tore the document open, read the first few lines, and hurled it into the bushes before storming inside. For the first time since the crash, Nicole allowed herself to breathe. She didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. It was something deeper, colder. She felt clarity. The war was no longer happening in whispers and shadows. It was out in the open now, documented, dated, and sworn under oath. And for the first time since moving into that quiet suburban street, Nicole knew that the end, whatever it would look like, was finally coming into view. The lawsuit changed everything. What had once been a battle fought through whispered rumors and petty acts of vandalism now moved into the glaring light of legal scrutiny, and Karen, stripped of her veneer of innocence, responded like a wounded animal, cornered, unpredictable, and increasingly dangerous. For Nicole, the process itself was exhausting. Meetings with her lawyer, the endless paperwork, the interrogatories that demanded she recount every moment of the last several months in excruciating detail. Yet beneath the fatigue there was something new, a kind of grim determination that replaced fear. She wasn't hiding anymore. She had already lost her peace of mind, her trust in her neighbors, and part of her faith in decency. All that remained to lose was patience, and Karen had already taken that. It began with the discovery process. Aaron filed motions compelling Karen to release her insurance and driving records, and within days, cracks began to appear in Karen's carefully curated facade. The documents showed that she had been driving without valid coverage for nearly a year, and that her license suspension from the DUI case had already been extended due to her failure to attend mandatory treatment classes. When confronted, her lawyer tried to downplay it, insisting that these were administrative oversights, but the truth was there in black and white. Nicole didn't take pleasure in it, but she felt something close to justice, an acknowledgement that the woman who had terrorized her was finally being forced to face consequences. Karen's response, however, was pure retaliation. The same week her attorney was forced to disclose the documents, Nicole woke to find graffiti sprayed across her driveway in thick red paint. The words liar and fraud scrawled in uneven lines. The cameras caught nothing. Whoever had done it had known exactly where the blind spots were. Aaron called the police again, but the report felt like a formality. The officer's voice over the phone was sympathetic but detached. "We can't prove it's her," he said. "You'll need direct footage." Nicole cleaned the paint herself, each sweep of the brush leaving her more hollow. It wasn't just vandalism. It was the message behind it. The reminder that even as the case moved through the courts, Karen still found ways to reach across the invisible line separating their homes. Word of the lawsuit spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some people pretended not to know. Others were brazenly curious, stopping Nicole on her walks to ask questions that sounded polite but reeked of gossip. A few, quietly and cautiously, expressed support. One older neighbor, Mr. Hanley, approached her while she was repairing her mailbox. "Don't let her scare you," he said softly, glancing toward Karen's house. "She's done this before, you know. Years ago, she tried to have a couple evicted over a hedge dispute. Drove them out in less than 6 months." His voice trembled with anger, but also something else. Fear. "No one's ever stood up to her like you're doing." Nicole thanked him, and though the words were meant to comfort, they only made the weight heavier. The court hearing was scheduled for the following month, and Aaron spent every day preparing. They built their case meticulously: timeline charts, audio transcriptions, expert analysis of the dashcam footage showing Karen accelerating intentionally, and new testimony from the police officer who had responded the morning of the crash. Every angle was airtight. Still, Karen found new ways to provoke her. She began standing at the edge of her property whenever Nicole left for work. Her arms folded, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses, her mouth curved into that same infuriating smirk. Sometimes she muttered things just loud enough to be heard. "Crazy woman. Attention seeker. You'll regret this." Other times she simply watched, motionless, as if daring Nicole to react. One night, Nicole's phone buzzed with a notification from her security system. Movement detected in the backyard. She opened the app to see a figure crouched near her side gate. the flashlight beam flickering against the fence. Her pulse surged. She zoomed in and froze. It was Karen again, wearing dark clothes, her hair pulled back, moving slowly and deliberately. Nicole called the police, whispering into the phone while keeping her eyes on the screen. It took them 15 minutes to arrive, but by then, Karen was gone. The officers searched the perimeter and found nothing except a small metal object glinting in the dirt. A car key, stamped with the logo of a rental company. Karen's license might have been suspended, but clearly that hadn't stopped her from finding loopholes. The next morning, Aaron filed for a restraining order. It was granted within hours. Karen was forbidden from approaching within 50 feet of Nicole's property and from initiating any contact, direct or indirect. When the papers were delivered, Nicole watched through her kitchen window as Karen stood on her porch, reading them, her face twisting into something almost inhuman. She tore the document in half, crumpled it, and tossed it into the air like confetti before storming inside. For a brief, fragile moment, Nicole felt a flicker of relief, but she underestimated how a person like Karen reacted to losing control. Within days, Karen began manipulating others to act for her. A letter arrived from the HOA, once again citing multiple complaints regarding improper vehicle placement. A group of local teenagers, probably encouraged or paid, began loitering near Nicole's house, mocking her whenever she stepped outside. One evening, she came home to find a dead plant dumped on her porch with a note pinned to it. Even nature doesn't want to live next to you. Aaron urged her not to engage, to focus on the case, but Nicole felt trapped in an invisible net woven from fear and fury. She started double-locking her doors, leaving the lights on all night, and keeping a flashlight by her bed like a weapon. Sleep became impossible. Every rustle outside the window felt like a threat. The turning point came when the police, following up on the restraining order violation, pulled rental car records linked to Karen's name. The dates matched perfectly with the nights Nicole's cameras had captured suspicious movement. The evidence was irrefutable. A warrant was issued, and for the first time, Karen faced real criminal consequences. She was charged with harassment, property damage, and violation of a restraining order. The day she was served, Nicole watched the police knock on her door, watched Karen's defiance crumble into outrage as they led her to the cruiser, shouting about conspiracies and ungrateful neighbors. The sound of the car door closing echoed down, the street like the end of a storm that had lasted far too long. But even then, as the patrol car disappeared around the corner, Nicole couldn't bring herself to celebrate. Her hands were trembling, and her eyes burned from sleepless nights. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was exhaustion, deep and bone-heavy. The victory was real, but so was the damage. Her garden was ruined, her reputation scarred, her nerves frayed. The court case was still ongoing, and there would be months of hearings. But for the first time since that terrible morning when her fence was shattered, the silence outside her window was just silence again. She stood on her porch, the air cool and still, and allowed herself to breathe. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't afraid to. The day of the final hearing dawned gray and heavy, the kind of day that felt weighed down by its own silence. Nicole arrived early, dressed in muted tones that mirrored the sky, her hair pulled back, her nerves drawn taut like wire beneath her calm expression. Aaron was already there, sorting through her notes with that same quiet focus that had carried them through the past months. Across the courtroom, Karen sat rigid beside her attorney, her once perfect posture now tense and brittle. She wore a navy suit, her makeup thick, as if she could paint over the cracks that had begun to show. When their eyes met, it was like watching two storms collide, neither willing to retreat, both aware that this was the end of something that had gone far beyond reason. The judge entered, a tall man with a weary look that suggested he'd seen too many lives unravel over petty suburban wars. The room settled into silence as he reviewed the case summary. "This dispute," he began slowly, "started as an incident of property damage and has escalated into a matter of harassment, defamation, and criminal conduct." His gaze shifted from one woman to the other. "Today we will settle it." Karen's attorney rose first, his tone smooth but strained. He tried to frame Karen's actions as the result of emotional provocation, a poor choice of words under stress. He spoke of neighborly misunderstandings, of exaggerated interpretations, of an unfortunate series of coincidences. But when he turned to the evidence, the videos, the police reports, the rental car records, his voice began to falter. Each document, each clip, each timestamp built a wall that no excuse could climb. When it was Nicole's turn, Aaron stood and spoke not with theatrics, but with precision. My client has endured a campaign of intimidation that began with a deliberate act of property destruction and escalated into stalking, vandalism, and defamation, she said, her voice steady and sharp. She followed every lawful step, reporting, documenting, restraining orders, while the defendant repeatedly and willfully ignored them. This is not about a misunderstanding. It is about a pattern of control and retaliation. She motioned for the technician to play the Dashcam video one final time. The screen lit up with the now familiar image, Karen's SUV idling for several seconds, then jerking forward and plowing into the fence. The sound of wood splintering filled the courtroom. A murmur rippled through the room. Karen sat motionless, her jaw clenched, her eyes glinting with fury. Next came the police footage, her refusal of the sobriety test, her slurred denials, the moment the officer told her she was under arrest. And finally, the security clips. Karen in her robe, standing at the fence at night, whispering to herself. Karen crouched by the gate with a flashlight. Karen's rental car idling in front of Nicole's house long after midnight. Each clip was a nail in the coffin of her credibility. When the final video ended, there was a long silence broken only by the faint hum of the courtroom lights. The judge leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, and exhaled slowly. Mrs. McAllister, he said, addressing Karen, you have shown a reckless disregard for the law and for the well-being of your neighbor. You have violated a restraining order, driven without a license, and engaged in behavior that any reasonable person would consider harassment. This court finds you guilty of property destruction, criminal harassment, and violation of court orders. Karen's attorney began to protest, but the judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack that silenced the room. You are hereby sentenced to 1 year of probation, mandatory rehabilitation for substance abuse, and a 5-year suspension of your driving privileges. You will also pay full restitution for the damage to Ms. Lawson's property and cover all legal expenses incurred. For a moment, no one moved. Karen's face drained of color, her lips trembling as if she couldn't comprehend what she had just heard. Then the mask shattered. "This isn't justice!" she shouted, slamming her palms against the table. "She's lying! She ruined my life!" The bailiff stepped forward, but the judge's calm, unyielding stare froze her mid-sentence. "You ruined your own life, Mrs. McAllister," he said quietly. Court adjourned. As the room emptied, Karen was escorted out, still muttering under her breath, her voice hoarse with anger and disbelief. Nicole remained seated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Aaron touched her shoulder lightly. "It's over," she said. The words sounded fragile, almost unbelievable. Nicole nodded slowly, but she didn't feel relief at first, only a kind of stunned quiet. Months of fear, sleepless nights, and confrontation condensed into that single moment, leaving behind a strange, hollow calm. She stood, gathered her things, and walked out into the hallway. Outside the courthouse, the air felt cleaner than it had in months. The gray sky had begun to break, thin streaks of sunlight cutting through the clouds. Reporters waited by the steps, eager for a quote, but Nicole ignored them. She didn't owe anyone her story, not anymore. She took a deep breath and looked across the street, where the traffic moved with the indifferent rhythm of ordinary life. Everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. That evening, back home, she stood on her porch looking at the repaired fence. The paint was fresh, the boards perfectly aligned, a quiet symbol of endurance. For the first time since the day Karen's SUV had torn through it, the place felt whole again. She could hear the faint laughter of children playing down the block, the rustle of leaves, the soft hum of a world returning to normal, She wasn't naive enough to think that scars disappeared. They never did. But she understood now that peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the choice to rebuild after it. Nicole ran her hand along the smooth wood, exhaled slowly, and allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The war was over, and she had survived it. Weeks passed before Nicole truly began to believe that the silence outside her window was permanent. At first, she would still wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, listening for footsteps or the distant hum of an engine. But each morning brought the same calm stillness, the ordinary suburban quiet she had once taken for granted. Karen's house remained dark and empty, a for sale sign staked in the front yard, its corners fluttering slightly in the wind. The gossip had died down, the neighbors' curiosity dulled by time and discomfort. A few offered polite smiles now, hesitant but genuine, and though Nicole accepted them, she no longer sought validation. She had stopped living for anyone else's approval. The settlement money arrived a month later, along with a formal apology drafted by Karen's attorney. A letter so cold and mechanical, it might as well have been written by a machine. Nicole read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it in the back of a drawer. The victory was not in the words or the compensation. It was in reclaiming the simple act of peace. She repaired her garden herself, planting rows of lavender and wild daisies where the damage had once been, choosing colors that softened the sharp memories of the past year. On warm evenings, she would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the golden light slide across the fence, the same fence that had once been shattered by malice, but now stood stronger than before. One Saturday afternoon, a small group of neighbors gathered by her gate, people who had once avoided eye contact, now bringing over baked goods and tentative apologies. Mr. Hanley, the older man who had warned her about Karen months ago, handed her a small potted plant. "A fresh start," he said with a faint smile. Nicole thanked him and placed it by the steps. It wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was about quiet acknowledgement, the unspoken understanding that they had all been complicit in their silence and were now trying, in their own way, to make amends. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Nicole stood in her yard and felt something she hadn't in a long time. Contentment without caution. The fear had faded, replaced by a calm strength born from endurance. She realized that survival wasn't only about winning battles, but about learning to live without letting the echoes of those battles define her. The house, once a place of anxiety and confrontation, had become hers again in every sense, a symbol not of escape, but of resilience. She glanced at the fence one last time before heading inside, the scent of lavender trailing in the breeze. It no longer marked the boundary between her and her tormentor. It marked the beginning of everything she had fought for: safety, dignity, and peace, hard-earned and fully her own.